So some listeners reached out and asked us to take a closer look at what's happening in Cambodia.
Right.
And specifically, they're concerned about these accusations of human trafficking and forced labor, and really wanted to hear from the people who are caught in the middle of this. So I've got a pretty big stack of sources here.
Okay.
Firsthand accounts, news articles, reports from NGOs, and they paint a pretty grim picture.
Yeah.
So to help me make sense of all this, I've got an expert with me today.
Well, it's definitely a complex situation, but one thing that jumps out at me right away is just the scale of this issue.
Yeah.
The sources suggest tens of thousands.
Wow.
Potentially even over 100,000 people.
100,000.
Are trapped in these exploitative schemes.
That's the population of a small city.
It is.
Yeah.
And many of them are being lured from other Southeast Asian countries with promises of, good jobs and better lives.
Okay, so how are so many people being drawn into this?
Well, it seems like deception is a big part of it.
Okay.
These criminal networks are using fake job ads on social media,
Okay.
often promising really high salaries and legitimate work.
Yeah.
And they really seem to target individuals who are facing economic hardship,
Okay.
especially in countries like Thailand, Vietnam, Malaysia.
So they're really playing on people's desperation.
Yeah.
Their hope for a better future.
Yeah. It's just awful.
It is, and once they arrive in Cambodia, they're often taken to these heavily guarded compounds. Their movements are restricted.
And he ends up being forced to work for this illegal online gambling operation.
Wow.
It's a real classic bait and switch.
Yeah, that's heartbreaking.
It is.
But what I don't get is, if these are online businesses,
yeah,
why do they need to keep people trapped in these compounds?
Right.
Why not just have them work remotely?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And the sources give us some insight into that.
Okay.
It really seems like control is a key element here.
Okay.
Keeping people confined ensures that they can't escape.
Yeah.
They can't contact authorities.
Right.
And they can't expose what's happening.
Okay, so it's all about maintaining this secrecy.
Absolutely.
And it seems like the work itself is pretty terrible, too.
Yeah.
From what I'm seeing, forced participation in these online scams.
That's right. The sources describe a whole range of scams that are being perpetrated.
Like what?
Online gambling, loan sharking.
Okay.
Even fabricated romantic relationships, all designed to swindle people out of their money.
And these people are forced to work these long hours under constant surveillance,
Absolutely.
facing abuse, threats, even physical punishment. Wait, physical punishment?
Yeah.
Like, what are we talking about?
The accounts describe some pretty horrifying things.
Okay.
Starvation, beatings, threats of being sold to other gangs. One source even mentions torture with stun guns.
So this isn't just about shady online businesses.
No.
This is about serious human rights abuses.
Right, yeah.
Absolutely.
But who's responsible for stopping this? Surely the Cambodian government.
Well, that's where things get even more complex.
Yeah.
There are widespread allegations of corruption and complicity within the Cambodian government.
Okay.
Some reports claim that officials are accepting bribes to overlook these operations.
So basically turning a blind eye to modern-day slavery.
That's the accusation.
That's being leveled.
Okay.
However, it's important to note that the Cambodian government denies these claims.
Okay.
They assert that most foreign workers are in Cambodia voluntarily and that any problems that arise stem from contract disputes.
So we have these two conflicting narratives. On the one hand, these horrifying accounts of forced labor and abuse.
Right.
And on the other hand, the government claiming it's all misunderstandings and voluntary employment. This just screams cover-up to me.
It's certainly suspicious.
Yeah.
But we need to be careful about jumping to conclusions.
Okay.
It's crucial to consider all perspectives and evidence.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
But if the Cambodian government isn't doing enough, what about the international community?
Right.
Surely someone out there is trying to help these people.
Well, there are definitely organizations and countries working to address this situation.
Okay.
The United Nations, for example, has condemned these practices and called for greater action.
From the Cambodian government.
Okay.
And NGOs like Blue Dragon
Oh, yeah, Blue Dragon
are doing amazing work on the ground.
Yeah, they're the ones who specialize in rescuing children, right?
They do that.
Yeah.
But they also work with adults
Okay.
who are trapped in these forced labor situations.
Got it.
Like the ones we're talking about today.
Okay, so that's good to hear.
Yeah.
But I imagine it's a drop in the bucket compared to the scale of this problem.
It is a huge problem.
Yeah, what about other countries? What are they doing?
Well, some countries like the United States
Okay.
have imposed sanctions on individuals and companies that are known to be involved in these trafficking and scam operations.
Okay.
They're also working to raise awareness and put pressure on the Cambodian government.
To take stronger action.
Yeah.
Okay, so there are efforts being made, but it sounds like a really uphill battle.
It is.
What I'm really curious about is, what's it actually like inside one of these compounds?
Right.
We've talked about
Yeah. You know, the deception, the forced labor, the punishments.
Yeah.
But what about the day-to-day experience of someone who's trapped?
Well, we actually have a pretty detailed account from someone who went through that exact experience.
Okay.
A Turkish translator who was lured to Cambodia, ended up trapped in one of these compounds.
Wow.
He managed to escape,
Yeah.
and he shared his story publicly.
Wow.
Including some pretty harrowing details about his detention by Cambodian authorities.
Okay, this is the part that always gets to me.
Yeah.
Hearing these personal experiences really drives home the human cost
It does.
of this whole situation.
Yeah.
Tell me about this translator's experience.
Okay.
What happened to him?
Well, his story is really quite shocking. After realizing that he was trapped in this exploitative situation, he tried to leave, but he was detained by the Cambodian police.
What?
And he describes being locked in a room with no food or water. And he even talks about witnessing police prioritizing having their dinner over processing his release.
That's just unbelievable.
It is.
It's like they're completely indifferent to his plight.
It's a real lack of concern.
Yeah. But why was he even detained in the first place?
Well, it's not entirely clear from his account.
Okay.
But it seems like he may have been caught trying to leave the compound without permission.
Okay.
Or perhaps his employers reported him to the authorities as a way to maintain control.
Just to keep him trapped.
Yeah.
Wow.
Whatever the reason, it's clear that his detention was arbitrary and unjust.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So what happened next?
Well, he was eventually released thanks to the intervention of the Turkish embassy.
Okay.
But he did spend several days in a Cambodian detention center.
Oh, gosh.
And he's actually shared some disturbing images online that show the deplorable conditions there.
Okay. I'm really interested in seeing those photos.
Yeah.
And hearing more about what he went through during his detention. But before we get into that, can you give me a little more context about the types of scams these victims are being forced to run?
Sure.
I'm curious how they actually work.
Yeah.
And who they're targeting.
That's a good point. Let's delve into some specifics.
Perfect. Let's take a closer look at the mechanics of these scams.
From what I'm seeing in these sources, these scams are incredibly diverse and constantly evolving. But there are some common threads.
Okay.
For example, romance scams seem to be a mainstay.
Romance scams.
Yeah.
I think I've heard of those. But honestly, I always assumed they were pretty low-level stuff.
Oh.
Like a few emails.
Okay.
Maybe a stolen photo.
Yeah.
And then asking for a small amount of money.
You're definitely wrong.
Oh.
These are highly sophisticated operations.
Yeah.
The perpetrators create entirely fabricated online personas.
Okay.
Often stealing photos and crafting elaborate backstories to build trust with their victims.
So these aren't just teenagers in their basements sending out spam emails.
Right.
These are...
Yeah, these are organized gangs.
Okay.
They're running what are essentially digital sweatshops.
Wow.
Churning out fake profiles and crafting these personalized messages designed to tug at the heartstrings.
Okay.
They target people who are looking for companionship.
Okay.
Often those who are vulnerable or lonely.
So it's all about emotional manipulation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They build trust over weeks or even months, creating a sense of intimacy and connection before they ever ask for anything.
And then how do they actually get the money?
Well, the stories vary.
Okay.
Sometimes it's a sudden emergency.
Okay.
A sick relative. A business deal gone wrong.
Yeah.
And they need money immediately.
Yeah.
Other times, it's a more gradual process.
Yeah.
Convincing the victim to invest in a fake business opportunity or to help them relocate to be together.
That's just heartless.
It is.
Preying on people's desire for love and connection. And to think that all this is happening while these victims are trapped in those compounds, forced to participate in this cruelty.
It's awful.
It's just mind-boggling.
It is, and it really highlights the fact that this is a multi-layered crime.
Okay.
It's not only are these individuals victims of forced labor, but they're also being forced to become perpetrators of fraud.
Wow.
Causing harm to innocent people around the world.
So it's like this vicious cycle of exploitation.
Exactly.
The victims become the victimizers.
Right.
Yeah.
And it makes it even more difficult to break free.
I imagine.
Imagine the guilt and shame these individuals must feel, knowing that they're being forced to deceive and defraud people.
You mentioned other types of scams. What else are they running?
Well, investment scams are another big one.
Okay.
They create these fake websites, fabricate testimonials, and even use sophisticated marketing techniques to lure people into investing in non-existent businesses or opportunities.
So basically, they're playing on people's financial desperation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they often use these high-pressure tactics, creating a sense of urgency to push people into making these quick decisions without thinking things through.
It's like a modern-day snake oil salesman just happening online instead of at the town square.
That's a good analogy.
Yeah.
And it highlights the fact that while technology might have changed the methods, the underlying principles of these scams are still the same.
Yeah.
Preying on human vulnerability and greed.
We've talked a lot about the scams themselves, but what about the technology behind them?
Yeah.
What platforms are they using?
Right.
Are they using the dark web, encrypted messaging?
Right.
I'm really curious about the technical side of this.
It's a great question, and one that the sources don't really delve into deeply.
Okay.
But it seems that they're utilizing the same online platforms that we all use. Social media sites, messaging apps, even dating websites.
Wow.
They might be using VPNs and other tools to mask their location and identity.
Okay.
But they're not necessarily relying on any super secret or advanced technology.
So it's more about social engineering than hacking.
Exactly.
Oh.
They're experts at manipulating people, at building trust and then exploiting it.
I have to admit, all this talk about technology and scams is making me feel a little paranoid.
Yeah.
Is there anything individuals can do to protect themselves from falling victim to these schemes?
Absolutely. Awareness is key.
Okay.
Knowing that these scams exist, understanding the tactics they use, and being skeptical of offers that seem too good to be true. Okay. That's really your first line of defense.
So basically, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Good advice. But there are other things you can do too.
Okay.
Be cautious about sharing personal information online, especially on social media. Don't be afraid to ask questions.
Okay.
Do your research. Verify the legitimacy of any investment opportunity or job offer.
Yeah.
And if you ever feel pressured or uncomfortable, trust your instincts and walk away.
That's good advice. I think we all need to be more cautious in the digital age.
I agree.
But going back to Cambodia, what I'm still struggling to understand is the role of the government. How can these massive criminal operations be flourishing in plain sight?
Right.
Are the authorities really that corrupt?
Well, it's a complex issue.
Okay.
Corruption is certainly a major factor.
Okay.
The sources point to reports of officials accepting bribes, turning a blind eye to these operations, and even actively participating in them.
So they're actually complicit?
In some cases, yes. And this lack of accountability within Cambodia's system really allows these networks to thrive.
But surely there must be some officials who are trying to do the right thing.
There likely are. But the sources also highlight the power and influence that these criminal networks wield.
Right.
They have money connections and are often willing to resort to intimidation and violence to protect their interests.
So it creates this really dangerous environment.
It does.
For anyone who dares to challenge them, including honest officials.
Absolutely.
So it's a system riddled with fear and complicity.
It is.
No wonder it's so difficult to make any headway against these traffickers.
Yeah.
But what about the victims who manage to escape? What happens to them?
Well, this is where the role of organizations like Blue Dragon
Okay.
becomes absolutely crucial.
Okay.
They not only work to rescue victims from these compounds, but they also provide them with these vital support services.
Like what kind of support services are we talking about?
They offer medical care,
Okay.
legal aid, counseling, and safe housing to help them recover and rebuild their lives.
So it's not just about getting them out of immediate danger.
Right.
It's about providing them with the tools that they need to heal and move forward.
Exactly. The trauma these individuals have experienced is profound. They've been tricked, abused, exploited, and often forced to participate in criminal activities.
Yeah.
They need comprehensive support to address not only their physical needs, but also their psychological and emotional well-being.
That makes sense. But what about justice? Are these traffickers ever held accountable for their crimes?
Well, that's one of the most frustrating aspects of the situation. The sources suggest that prosecutions are rare, and convictions are even rarer.
Wow.
The combination of corruption, weak law enforcement, and the transnational nature of these networks makes it incredibly difficult to bring perpetrators to justice.
So in a way, they're operating with impunity.
Essentially, yes.
Wow.
And that lack of consequences just emboldens them further. They know they can get away with exploiting people because the odds of facing any real punishment are slim.
That's just infuriating.
It is.
It's like the system is designed to protect the perpetrators.
Yeah.
Not the victim.
It's a deeply unjust situation.
Yeah.
But it's important to remember that there are people fighting back. You know, organizations like Blue Dragon, activists, journalists, and even brave individuals within the Cambodian government who are risking their own safety to expose these abuses and demand justice.
It's good to know that there are people fighting the good fight.
Yeah.
But I imagine they're facing incredible challenges.
They are.
Yeah.
But their work is crucial. You know, they're not only rescuing victims and providing support, but they're also raising awareness, pushing for stronger laws, and advocating for systemic change.
Speaking of systemic change, one thing I haven't quite grasped yet is how exactly international efforts are addressing this issue. We've touched on sanctions.
Yeah.
But what other strategies are being employed?
Well, one key area is intelligence sharing and law enforcement cooperation. Countries are working together to track the flow of money, identify key players in these networks, and coordinate cross-border investigations.
So it's like a global game of cat and mouse.
In a sense, yes.
Wow.
These networks are constantly adapting, finding new ways to operate under the radar and evade detection. So law enforcement agencies need to be equally agile, using technology, intelligence, and international cooperation to stay one step ahead.
That sounds incredibly complex.
It is.
Yeah. But what about prevention? What can be done to stop people from falling victim to these schemes in the first place?
Well, education is a crucial part of the solution. We need to make people aware of the risks, teach them how to identify scams, and empower them to make safe choices online.
So public awareness campaigns, educational materials, that sort of thing?
Exactly. But it also goes deeper than that. We need to address the root causes of vulnerability. You know, poverty, lack of opportunity, and social isolation all contribute to making people more susceptible to these schemes.
So tackling issues like economic inequality and social injustice is also part of the fight against trafficking.
Absolutely.
Wow.
When people have access to education, job opportunities, and a sense of community, they're less likely to be lured by false promises and risky ventures.
That makes sense. It's a holistic approach.
It is.
Yeah, recognizing that trafficking is not just a criminal justice issue, but also a social and economic one.
Precisely.
Wow.
And it highlights the need for a multifaceted response involving governments, NGOs, businesses, and individuals all working together.
That's a lot to unpack.
It is.
And we've only just scratched the surface of this complex issue.
Yeah.
But I'm particularly drawn to the personal stories. Like one of the Turkish translators.
Yeah.
It really brings the human cost of this tragedy into sharp focus.
I agree. Personal accounts are incredibly powerful. They help us understand the lived experience of those caught in this web of exploitation.
And this translator, he not only escaped, but also chose to share his story publicly.
Yeah.
Even though it must have been incredibly painful.
It must have been.
Yeah. What can you tell me about his experience in the detention center? The conditions he faced, and what ultimately led to his release?
His account is really quite harrowing. He describes being held in this crowded, filthy cell.
Oh my gosh.
Lacking basic necessities like food and water. He talks about witnessing other detainees being abused.
Oh gosh.
And just this constant fear and uncertainty that permeated the place.
It sounds like a nightmare. So how did he manage to get out?
Well, he credits his release to the intervention of the Turkish embassy. They were alerted to his situation and worked tirelessly to secure his freedom.
Okay, that's a glimmer of hope in all of this.
Yeah.
But what I'm really curious about now is the psychological impact of all this.
Right.
I can only imagine the trauma that he and others like him have endured. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, it's really hard to overstate the psychological toll of these experiences.
I imagine.
Yeah.
Just like a living nightmare.
The sources describe this constant state of fear and anxiety, the feeling of being trapped, powerless, and dehumanized.
And there's the guilt and shame that they might feel.
Right.
Being forced to participate in these scams. Knowing they're causing harm to others.
That's a huge burden to carry.
Yeah.
And it's compounded by the fact that they've often been isolated from their families and support networks, making it even harder to cope.
So even after they escape, the trauma doesn't just disappear?
No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
Many survivors struggle with PTSD, depression, anxiety.
Yeah.
Difficulty trusting others. They may have nightmares, flashbacks.
Wow.
Emotional numbness.
It's like the wounds are invisible, but they're just as real as any physical injury?
Exactly. And that's why access to specialized mental health care is absolutely crucial for survivors.
So it's not just about rescuing them and providing basic necessities.
Right.
It's about addressing these deep psychological scars left by these experiences.
Absolutely. They need therapists who understand the complexities of trauma, who can help them process what they've been through and develop coping mechanisms. And it's a long-term process. You know, recovery from this kind of trauma takes time, patience, and ongoing support.
It makes you wonder how many of these survivors actually receive adequate mental health care.
Right.
Especially considering the stigma surrounding trafficking.
Yeah.
And the challenges they face just trying to rebuild their lives.
It's a valid concern. Access to quality mental health care is often limited. Particularly in countries like Cambodia, where resources are already stretched thin.
And then there's the language barrier, cultural differences, the fear of being re-trafficked.
Absolutely.
All these additional hurdles.
Huge hurdles.
That they have to overcome.
It's a daunting reality. And it highlights the need for greater investment in mental health services for trafficking survivors. As well as culturally sensitive approaches that take into account their unique needs and experiences.
This whole situation feels so overwhelming. Knowing that tens of thousands of people are trapped in these horrific conditions.
It's awful.
That they're being abused, exploited, robbed of their dignity. It's just heartbreaking.
It is, but it's important not to succumb to despair. You know, there are people fighting back. Organizations like Blue Dragon, activists, journalists, even brave individuals within the Cambodian government.
Who are risking their own safety to expose these abuses and demand justice.
It's those stories of courage and resilience that give me hope.
Me too. And remember, we're not powerless in this. Awareness is a powerful tool. By learning about this issue, sharing information, and supporting organizations working to combat trafficking, we can all contribute to creating a world where these atrocities are no longer tolerated.
That's a good reminder. It's easy to feel helpless in the face of such a massive problem. But even small actions can make a difference.
Exactly. And the more people who are aware, the more pressure we can put on governments and businesses to take responsibility and take action.
So what are some concrete steps listeners can take if they want to get involved?
Well, donating to organizations like Blue Dragon is a great start. They rely on public support to continue their rescue and support operations.
And what about those of us who might not be in a position to donate financially? Are there other ways to help?
Absolutely, spreading awareness is crucial.
Share what you've learned from this deep dive with your friends, family, and social networks. Write to your elected officials, urging them to prioritize anti-trafficking efforts. Support ethical businesses and boycott those with questionable labor practices.
So it's about using our voices, our choices, and our influence to push for change.
Exactly.
This has been a heavy but incredibly important conversation.
It has.
It shed light on a dark corner of the world. And the urgent need for action.
Absolutely.
Thank you for helping me unpack all of this.
It's been my pleasure. And remember, even though the stories we've discussed are incredibly difficult, they represent just a fraction of the millions of people affected by trafficking worldwide. Their stories deserve to be heard,
Yeah.
their pain acknowledged, and their rights defended.
You've given me a lot to think about and a lot to act on.
Okay.
To our listeners, if this deep dive has moved you, I urge you to do your own research.
Yes.
Stay informed and find ways to get involved.
Please do.
Every action, no matter how small, can contribute to creating a world where exploitation and slavery have no place.
Absolutely.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.